Good evening, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Make sure I'm on. Welcome to this episode of Steelers Friday Night Six Pack. I'm your host, Tony Defio, and I do apologize for being an hour late. We had some technical difficulties, but thanks to Brian, Anthony Davis, and Dave Schofield, who talked me through it like a few minutes ago, we're able to get on the air or on streaming or whatever you call podcasts. But I thank those guys, particularly Dave, who called me and gave me all the right codes I needed, which is what he did last year when I started my first show for the brunch. But you know they're all awesome and they all know what you're doing. And I don't know what happened. I logged on at just before 9 o'clock and it just wouldn't. I just kept getting an error page. But that happens sometimes in the world of streaming broadcasts. So here I am. It's a little after 10, but that's okay. I'm ready to go. I'm raring to go. And please check out before I continue. See, I have to get my thoughts straight now because 2 minutes ago I didn't think I was going to be able to do the show, but here we are. So before I continue, I just gotta get myself together here. Before I continue, please, I ask you as always to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We bring you this show, the Scobro Show. The Hangover, Steelers Preview, Touchdown Under, The Curtain Call, and we have more shows, more live shows coming to you in the fall. And you can catch those on YouTube and Facebook, and you can catch all those live shows after the fact on any audio platform. I name them every week. I would normally name them tonight, but Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, they're everywhere. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can find our stuff. Please check it out, and please check out our audio only shows, including the War Room, the Steelers Retro Show, the Stat Geek, the Live Mic, Let's Ride. It's probably more, but we have more of those shows coming to you this fall too. Believe me, hardest working Steelers podcasting platform out there. Believe me, we all do a great job. Those guys do a great job. Jeff Hartman, the senior editor, Dave Schofield, editor, Michael Beck, deputy editor, Brian Anthony Davis, podcasting manager, all the writers, all the podcasters, Mark Davidson, Matty Peverall, Jeffrey Benedict. He has a show coming out in the fall, I believe. If I missed a Shannon White, oh my gosh, Shannon White! How could I forget about Shannon White? He's our new member of the Hangover every Monday night, and he brings so much great insight. He's such a grounding presence on the show too. I just really love his charisma and demeanor, and he along with Brian and me, we're going to be bringing you great stuff every Monday on the Hangover, all kind of great stuff. And please check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website. We bring you news, commentary, film breakdown. The whole 9 yards, as we like to say, it's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers needs. And look at this live chat. Wow, look at it. Just me. I haven't seen Just Me in a while. Good to see you, Just Me. She says, "Hey, family, let's toast media." That's pretty funny. Brad Jewett, Nick Hancock. You guys are awesome for sticking around. Brad Jewett, Steelers Pittsburgh, Kathy Ford, Clarence Washington, Brian Brown. And Andrew Wilbar. All right, Andrew Wilbar, the young phenom. He's with us tonight. So you guys are awesome for staying with me an hour later. And now I got to get my thoughts together after I got the intro out of the way. And I guess my thoughts have to do with a little free agency. And I saw something on Twitter on Friday. Somebody was asking why the Steelers aren't doing anything, even though they've now accrued over $14 million in salary cap space, thanks to things like the release not long ago of David DeCastro. And I was thinking about that. Why aren't they doing anything? But then again, what do people want them to do? I guess it's still a matter of depth. I guess you can look at one of the cornerback slots and say, well, they can use a veteran there. You have people like Brian Poole still available. As far as the depth and safety, that could be addressed, at least on if you're looking at it right now heading into camp, they could maybe use a a veteran presence there. If you're not sold on youngsters like Antoine Brooks, and why would you be? He really didn't do much last year. He didn't really show much. And of course, Miles Killebrew is more of a when he was with Detroit anyway, he was more of a special teams guy than he was a defender, either at safety or inside linebacker. So, yeah, I can see that. So the question is, why aren't the Steelers doing anything? Why aren't they bringing anybody in? But maybe the bigger question, the broader question is, why aren't a lot of teams making moves with these guys still out there? I mean, I mentioned Brian Poole, Justin Houston's been brought up a lot, Melvin Ingram, Austin Ryder, the center from the Chiefs, formerly of the Chiefs, obviously Malik Hooker. So many names out there, and why aren't the Steelers making moves? Sure, but why aren't any other teams making moves? Because I checked, thanks to SpotRack.com, I checked the salary cap space for all the teams in the NFL, and 21 of them have $7.6 million in room or more. The Steelers are in the middle at 14.3, I think it is, and all the way up top with the Jets and the Jaguars are around 35 million. So why aren't any teams bringing in these veterans that are out there? I mean, what's the deal? That's the question I have. Is it's easy to view the Steelers and their situation. It's easy to view that in the vacuum. Why aren't they making any moves? Well, why aren't a lot of these teams making moves? I mean, don't teams need depth don't other teams need depth too? The Jets, whomever. So what's the deal? So I think that's an interesting question. I don't think it's collusion. I don't think it's because of at this point, it's not because the salary cap is lower in 2021 thanks to the pandemic last year. I don't think that's the case because, as I mentioned, there's a lot of teams out there with a healthy amount of cap space. So there has to be a reason. Maybe a lot of these guys are just asking for too much money. Steven Nelson's at the top of the I looked up the top 100 free agents on, I forget what site it was. And Nelson, who was recently released by not even recently anymore. It was back a few months ago. He was released after they went back and forth on a contract renegotiation. And I guess Nelson didn't want to take a pay cut, or the Steelers thought he counted too much against the cap. Anyway, he was released and it was kind of ugly. Not really ugly, but ugly enough publicly between the two parties, at least Nelson on Twitter, right before he was released. He's out there still. He's 28 years old. I think 29. Brian Poole's about 28, 29 years old. So these guys are not, a few of these guys or a lot of these guys actually are still in their late 20s. So maybe they're just asking for too much money and teams don't want to pay them for what they're looking for. That's the only thing I can think of. Because if you're thinking that any of these guys can maybe possibly help with depth or maybe even can come into camp and compete for a starting job, I mean, look at the Steelers. Their uncertainty at center. Yeah, everybody's excited about Kendrick Green, the third-round pick from Illinois, but he's still a rookie. He still hasn't played a down in the NFL preseason or otherwise. And, of course, the B.J. Finney's stock has appeared to have dropped over the last year or so after his forgettable 2020 with the Seahawks and the Bengals. J.C. Hassenauer, he really has improved. He started 6 games last year, but by all accounts, they weren't a great 6 starts. So, a guy like Austin Reeder, however you say his last name, you would think that the Steelers would bring him in, and help shore up that line if they could get him at a decent price, but maybe he's just asking for too much money. So I guess my overall point is, the Steelers are standing pat as they head into training camp next week. Actually, it's the 16th of July as I'm doing this show, but they're apparently reporting. I think it was reported today on Friday that they're reporting on the 22nd. So 6 days away, they're not the only ones that are content with their roster, it would appear. So that's pretty much all I had to say about that. I think I had it better rehearsed in my head before my technical difficulties. But what are you going to do? I pretty much covered everything I needed to cover with that topic. Let's see what we have here with some of the comments. Mark Tobin says, smart thing to do if you're all in like they claim is sign a backup pass rush guy. That might, yeah. I mean, but a player like an Ingram or Houston, I mean, they're in their early 30s. They would be great additions, I think, is to provide veteran depth. I mean, it'd be fantastic. But what are they asking for? That's the question. If they're asking for a little bit too much money to be a backup, maybe one or both of those guys feel like they can be a starter still. I mean, we saw what happened with James Harrison a number of years ago, back in 2017 when they drafted T.J. Watt, and of course Bud Dupree was coming along, heading into his third year. So they both started pretty much 90. They took out about 95% of the snaps, and Harrison barely played, and he became disgruntled, and they had to cut him before the end of the year. So maybe these one or both of those guys are they have that same kind of mindset that they feel like they can still contribute heavily, and perhaps Pittsburgh doesn't want to deal with that kind of thing in 2021. Obviously, T.J. Watt's not going to injuries aside, he's not going to miss much time, and Alex Highsmith is your presumed starter heading in. Of course, he still has a lot to prove, but those are your starters heading into 2021. There's no question about that. So you're right about that. It would be smart to bring in a veteran pass rusher, but maybe they're asking for too much money. Maybe in the eyes of a lot of these teams, maybe these guys are simply just washed up. I don't know. And Mark Tobin says, again, surely they can't ask for too much money. Well, don't be so sure of that. The ego of a professional athlete, sometimes they're the last to admit that they're not what they once were. Brian Brown asks rhetorically, I'm so ready for some Steelers football. Is it kickoff time yet? Not quite, but believe it or not, 3 weeks from Thursday, it will be. They'll be playing the Cowboys in the Hall of Fame game. And Andrew Wilbar says, and he's a young phenom. He keeps tabs on this stuff. And he says, I would keep close tabs on the Winovich situation. Very good chance he is cut. I find that curious because, I mean, he contributed, from what I remember, looking up his stats a couple months ago, actually, when people were starting to get on the Winovich train as a possibility of him coming to Pittsburgh. He contributed a great deal last year with the Patriots. So I don't know why they would cut him, but then again, who knows? You never know with in the NFL. All right. That's my first topic. And wow, I managed to ramble on for 14 minutes. I didn't think I'd be able to do that after my my inauspicious start. But I just wanted to touch on one more thing before I took a break, and that is the news the other day that Pro Football Reference has decided to include unofficial sack totals dating back to 1960 for players that played before 1982 and beyond, I guess, which I think is pretty cool. They're not official, but we now know that Elsie Greenwood, who we always suspected for years prior to James Harrison breaking his all-time franchise record, was the leader in sacks. And he's not anymore, obviously. I just said James Harrison broke the record. I think it was 2017, 2016, somewhere in there. But we know that he has, again, unofficially 78 sacks. We know that Mean Joe Green has 77 and a half. unofficially, and there's some other players in there that they guys like Jack Ham and Jack Lambert and Andy Russell, and I think Dwight White had 58 or 55, something like that. But now we know that Elsie Greenwood, he led, at least unofficially, that Steel Curtain defense in sacks when they were helping the Steelers win 4 Super Bowls in 6 years, arguably the greatest dynasty ever, and he was arguably the greatest defense ever, at least over a period of a number of years. And he was he led the entire unit in sacks, and I think that's great. Is he up there with the likes of Deacon Jones? My goodness, 173 and a half unofficially. He always claimed to have a ton of sacks, and I'm a big Deacon Jones fan. Just love the guy. I love the way he played, and of course I love his bravado and his persona and his charisma and all the interviews he did with NFL Films after he retired. He passed away recently, so I don't know how recently, but he passed away within the past decade or so. So R.I.P. to him. But he always claimed to have a lot, and according to the research done by Pro Football Reference, he has 173 and a half. So anyway, LC's not going to be in that category. He's nowhere near that. He was nowhere near that kind of a pass rusher. But when you look at the overall numbers for the all-time great receivers, Lynn Swann and John Stallworth were nowhere near the all-time greats as far as stats, and yet they're in the Hall of Fame because they were. You could just look at them and say those guys were Hall of Fame players. They passed the eye test through ability and coming through in the clutch, coming through in big moments, and maybe that's why Elsie really. As far as the voters, there's always the Steeler bias. There's too many Steelers in the Hall of Fame, especially from those 70s teams. That's probably hurting him. But also, if you really think about it, Elsie never really had many. It's hard to point to a signature moment for him. Not to say that he didn't have any big moments and clutch moments and make big plays, because obviously he did. But you can't really think of anything. Any signature moment for him in a Super Bowl or maybe even in a playoff game or in a regular season game where he just really made that play that people talk about, to this day. So maybe that's what's holding him back. Obviously, officially or unofficially, he's nowhere near the all-time leaders in sacks, but also he didn't have that signature game or year or performance where he was like Defensive Player of the Year, or Super Bowl MVP or anything like that. So that could be hurting his chances. But still, I think he should be in. To repeat myself, if you're the leader in sacks of arguably the greatest defense of all time, then you should be in the Hall of Fame. So on that note, I will take a break. I will close out the first half of tonight's show. And if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook, please don't go anywhere. I will be right back. If you're listening on an audio platform, thank you for downloading part 1. And please come on back and download part 2 of this episode of Steelers Friday Night Six Pack. And welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of this episode of Steelers Friday Night Six Pack. Again, I want to apologize if you're watching live on YouTube or Facebook. I want to apologize for my 60-minute delay, but hey, sometimes baseball games get delayed for an hour or two, and we're in the middle of July, so maybe it's appropriate. I think the Pirates game might have been delayed. I know it was raining a little earlier here, so perhaps that's fitting. I'm sure somewhere in baseball on Friday night, it's raining and they had to delay a game. So I thank you for sticking with me, and if you downloaded part 2, I thank you for that too. So I don't know where this came from, but it's a kind of a non sequitur, and it's from Vodka Drinker, and he says, "I swear to God, above, if I ever see a playoff game like we had against Cleveland, I'll stop watching pro football." Well. I wouldn't make that kind of a a bold claim because you're probably going to see another game like that at some point in your life. It's just how it is to be a sports fan. There's a lot of highs, but there's a lot of lows. And last year, 28-0 by the end of the first quarter, that was a pretty low moment in Steelers history. But you never know. They might have the exact opposite kind of a playoff game this year, and maybe it's against the Chiefs. Maybe it's against the Bills. Who knows? That's what I mean. That's why sports. If you go back and look at Steelers, just look at their playoff history. How many times like they play a playoff game on like the exact same day of a month, like January 23rd or something. Like 1 year on January 23rd. I think actually 96, 97. I think they might have played the divisional round game against the Patriots on the exact same date, because I think the 1 year was on a Sunday, and I know the following year for sure was on a Saturday. And of course, the 1 year in Foxborough, the 96 divisional round, they lost 28-3. It was kind of a little fog bowl at the end. Some fog came rolling in, not really bad, but I don't think it would have mattered anyway. And then the next year at Three Rivers, same game. I think it was the same date, just 1 year later, and they won 7-6. So that's what it's like to be a sports fan, an NFL fan, a Steeler fan. Ups and downs. You got your highs and lows. I was thinking a lot about the Titans game. To me, it was the worst playoff loss that I've ever seen. That divisional round game following the 2002 season, but it came 1 week after maybe the most exciting playoff game I've ever seen when they came back from a 24-7 deficit and beat the Browns in the wild card game in Heinz Field. So that's just what it is to be a sports fan. So I wouldn't make those claims just yet, vodka drinker, because you never know. You might witness that again, and you don't want to bow out too early being a sports fan. It's too much fun of a hobby. Speaking of which, just wanted to touch on a little about the pass rushing thing and how Pro Football Reference is including some sacks prior to 1982. Thanks to extensive research, just some great research by a couple of guys who are working with their site. And I got to tell you, I think I mentioned Deacon Jones at the beginning of, in the first half of the show. I think he might be the greatest pass rusher of all time, to be honest with you. I mean, if you look at his numbers, he's up there with Bruce Smith and some of the all-time greats who accumulated their numbers after the sack became an official stat in 1982. If these numbers are real, I mean, Deacon Jones, I read somewhere that teams didn't start passing, or the league didn't start passing more than rushing as a whole until like 1982, 1983. Before that, there was a period where it was even, and then for a while there, the running game dominated. So to be able to accumulate that many sacks in a period that they call the dead ball era, where defenses kind of dominated and offenses ran the ball more than they passed it, I think that says a lot for his overall talents. I mean, you can, it's all relative. I mean, you could say that Bruce Smith and those guys may have dominated just as much. Reggie White, another legend, they may have dominated just as much in Deacon Jones' era. And if you remember, if you know anything about the history of football, offensive linemen, they weren't allowed to extend their arms for years. So they had to keep their arms kind of close into their chest, which that's how they taught us to block in midget football in 1984. They were still doing that in 84 for some reason, even though the NFL changed the rule in 1978 and allowed offensive linemen to extend their arms. So if you're at that kind of a disadvantage as an offensive lineman in the 1960s and most of the 70s, and a guy like Deacon Jones, whose famous move was the head slap, they were allowed to do whatever they wanted, basically. So maybe that's another reason why he dominated so much. But I think he might be the greatest pass rusher of all time. And you look at some of these other numbers, like the Purple People Eaters. As good as the Steel Curtain was, and it was darn good. I mean, you had Alan Page, who's in the Hall of Fame. And according to the research done by these guys, by Pro Football Reference, he had 148.5 sacks for his career. Carl Eller, who's not in the Hall of Fame, and maybe he should be, he finished with 133.5 sacks. Now, again, these are all unofficial. Obviously, the Vikings never won a Super Bowl, and that probably hurt a player like Eller's chances. But, I mean, that's a lot of sacks to accumulate. So it's just amazing, some of the numbers that these guys put up back then. But I have one more thing on defense, and then I'll do some questions and comments. And that's the Steelers' 08 defense. And we all know how dominant it was, right? It finished number one in every category, except I think against the run. I wrote this all down earlier on Friday. They were number one in everything except the run, I believe. Yeah, they were second in rushing. And everybody knows they're one of the greatest defenses of all time, but I don't think anybody would dare put them in the same category as any of the 70s defenses from the Steelers. Maybe even the 2000 Ravens, they wouldn't put them in that same category. Certainly the 85 Bears, I don't think anybody would put the 08 Steelers in that category. But I think you gotta maybe elevate the status of that defense a little bit more. If you really look at what unfolded that year with the Steelers as a whole, people talk about Ben Roethlisberger, how iffy he looked coming back from the elbow surgery, and how he looked timid and afraid to get hit, and he didn't have the accuracy deep. But that line was so bad in 2008 that, I mean, here's Ben's numbers from 2008. He passed for 3,300 yards, 17 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. He was sacked 46 times, and he finished with a passer rating of 80.1, which, if you take out the 6 quarters he played in 2019, was the second worst of his career. Second worst passer rating of his career. Now, the running game finished 22nd in the league, and I think they rushed for 1,690 yards all year. It was pretty awful offense. And I think they finished 22nd overall. Yeah, 22nd. They were just horrific on offense that year. They averaged just under 22 points a game, which for modern football is not that great. And yet the Steelers, not only did they do everything well in a modern era, they did everything well in the modern era, which, yeah, I realize it was 13 years ago, but obviously the rules were heavily in favor of offense even in 2008. I mean, they've become more unbalanced in favor of the offense since then, but they were still pretty heavily in favor of the offense even in 2008. So to do that in modern pro football, to carry your team essentially to a Super Bowl, or at least to get them to the late in the Super Bowl, and then they kind of had a hiccup in the fourth quarter with thanks to Larry Fitzgerald, but still to carry a team to a Super Bowl championship in modern football with the kind of offense that they were throwing up there, it's pretty remarkable. You know, the 2000 Ravens, yeah, they had Trent Dilfer, and their passing attack was kind of bad, mediocre at best, but they still rushed for 2,200 yards in 2000. And if you look at some of the things that defense had, not only did they have to deal with a really inept offense for most of the year, but they had the toughest schedule in the NFL. We all know that. And look at the quarterbacks they had to play. Both Manning brothers, Phillip Rivers, Donovan McNabb, who was one of the premier quarterbacks of his era. Even Tony Romo, who people don't realize how the kind of numbers he put up. I mean, he wasn't clutch by any stretch of the imagination. There's nobody that's going to argue that. But he was a pretty darn good quarterback, and they shut all those guys down. They finished, another stat that I really love is they finished first in third down conversions as a defense. And, of course, they had, as any great Steeler defense, 51 sacks. So I think when you and they averaged just under 14 points a game. Yeah. And the Ravens in 2000 averaged about 10. But again, the Ravens didn't have the kind of quarterbacks and the kind of schedule that the Steelers had to deal with in 2008. So I think all things considered, the 08 defense, as much credit as it gets, I don't think it gets nearly as much credit as far as compared to some of the all-time great defenses, the 76 Steelers, the 85 Bears, and obviously the 2000 Ravens. I think the 08 Steelers defense is right up there with all the greats and whatever other defenses you want to, like, you know, I'm guilty of, like a lot of Steeler fans, of only thinking of the NFL pre or post 1970. But if you just put them up with some of the all-time great defenses, I think they're right up there, and maybe one of the most important defensive seasons ever any team's ever had. When you take into consideration, again, their schedule and what they had to put up with as far as their offense was concerned, which was pretty darn bad. It's mainly due to the offensive line, but it doesn't matter. It was still a pretty darn bad offense. So I can't believe I got through all my topics. I didn't think I would. I was so flustered before I and it's funny. It's funny because I ran into somebody on Friday, who I hadn't seen. He's from my buddy from my gym. I haven't seen him since before the pandemic, and I ran into him on Friday morning. He was like, "Hey, I caught your podcast." I'm like, "Really?" Because did I tell him that I do a podcast? Because last time I saw him, because I'm kind of sheepish, as bold as I am online. I'm kind of sheepish with telling a lot of people that I do this stuff for fun. Because, you know, mainly because of all the names I get called online. So I think it was pretty cool that, and he was complimentary and he seemed impressed. But he found our podcasting platform. I showed you how much we're growing. But anyway, the day that I ran into this guy, I turned out to be an hour late with my live podcast. So what are you going to do? But I hope if you're watching, I hope you're enjoying the show. So on that note, I will take some comments and questions. And first one is from our young Andrew. And he says, any thoughts on Haskins and his wife? What blame, if any, do you put on Haskins? I don't know. I really don't know the story. I try not to worry about what these guys do anymore. I try to, unless it's something really egregious, and this appears to be his wife was the aggressor. If it was the other way around, maybe I'd have a different attitude about it, but I don't know. I mean, I guess it's something to keep an eye on, but if he was their starting quarterback, I'd probably be a lot more concerned. But he's not. He's somebody who might not even make the team. I don't know who I would put the blame on, but hopefully he can rectify that situation, get that stuff in order. If your home life's in disarray, I guess it's kind of hard to concentrate on football. That's a lot different than social media, having a home life that's chaotic like that. So I think that could hurt a player as opposed to tweeting too much. All right. Let's see what we have here. Just Me says, Tony, you're liked by most. You do great. I appreciate that. Vodka Drinker says, I miss Dick LeBeau. I think we all do. Although I think Keith Butler's done a really great job the last couple of years. Of course, he's also been the recipient of some great talent. And it's amazing how good a coach becomes when you give him some all-pro talent. I think Jim Leland once said, you know, when you have great players, you're a smart manager. In his case, a baseball manager. When you don't have the talent, you're also all of a sudden you're an idiot. So Keith Butler, I think he's done a pretty decent job. And I was actually encouraged. I was talking to Brian and Shannon on Monday. We were doing the hangover, and we're going through this exercise of ranking the defenses of the AFC North. And like, man, the Steelers' defense last year was really, really good. And yeah, they lost a few pieces, but I think they might have far and away the best defense in the division. So there you go. Keep it on the theme of the defense. If the offense is going through some growing pains in 2021 with a new coordinator, and you're worried about the line, figuring that out, who's going to be the five starters, and You have Najee Harris as a rookie running back. You're going to be counting on him. It might take a while to get things heated up for that offense, but you might have a defense that's good enough, even without some key players from last year. It's good enough to keep them in a lot of games, and maybe you can eke out some early season victories, and who knows. Although in a perfect world, their offense will just be a juggernaut right from week one. We can only hope. Let's see what else we have here. Some Rajon 39 says, I think Pierre is going to be a dog. I hope you're right. I know a lot of people are really, really high on him. A lot of fans. I know Jeffrey Benedict loves him. Hey, if you can develop a player like that, an undrafted free agent, you have to do that sometimes in the NFL, because you're not going to hit on all your draft picks. And first of all, and second of all, you can't address every need, every weakness, every weakness in the draft with premium picks. So Andrew Wilbar asks, if you were the GM and could make any move you wanted, as long as it fit under the cap, what move would you make? Honestly, I'd probably go with people might not like this, but I'd probably go with based on what I just said about James Pierre and Rajon just said about James Pierre. I'd probably bring back Steven Nelson, because I think he's a solid player. And yeah, it was kind of an ugly divorce, but it wasn't that ugly where you couldn't forget. It wasn't Antonio Brown level. It was just a disagreement between employer and employee over pay, which we can all relate to. The only difference was it went public a little bit, which how could it not in 2021? I mean, stuff goes public all the time. I'd probably bring back Steven Nelson because I think, depth at outside linebacker might be an issue, because we don't know about Quincy Roche yet, and Cassius Marsh is a journeyman. But I think Steven Nelson is a way better cornerback than Justin Houston and Melvin Ingram are pass rushers. And plus, I think Steven Nelson can come in and start in 2021, whereas Houston and Ingram, they're not they're backups at this point. So at least they would be here, barring injury, of course. Do you think, and Richard Adamson asks, do you think the right side of the O-line will hold up this season? I don't know. You're talking about Trey Turner. He's had some injury issues. Zach Banner. I mean, that was a freak thing. I don't say freak thing, but that's not somebody who's, when you suffer a torn ACL, that's not somebody who's like battling chronic injuries. It's somebody who just had a nasty knee injury. So I think he'll be okay. He hasn't had a history of injuries, Zach Banner. So I think he'll be fine. So I think it'll be okay. I think Trey Turner, simply based on health, will be an upgrade over David DeCastro, because DeCastro he was dealing with that ankle all last year. So and Rajon asks, which outside linebacker would you bring in, Houston or Ingram? Probably Houston, because I know him more. I don't know a whole lot about Melvin Ingram. Let's see. Vodka Drinker says, we were that far apart from a long-term deal with Nelson. Yeah, they were far apart back in March, but it's 4 months later now. And, a lot of these guys if they still want to play in the league, they have to find a home. They're going to want to get paid something in 2021. They're football's their livelihood. I'm sure even though a lot of these guys probably have decent amount of money saved away, they still don't want to miss a full year of a football salary. So, all right. And Vodka Drinker says, I've been drinking. Excuse my spelling. That's okay. I'm flustered because I started an hour later. And there's nothing more frustrating, I've said this before, than I'm trying to make sure I say it right. Not swearing. Technology frustration. Dealing with a computer or a phone. There's nothing more frustrating than that, because you try the same things over and over again for some reason, because I don't know why you try the same things over and over again, because you always get the same results, because the computer's not a human, so they're not going to just suddenly fix themselves. But thankfully, Dave Schofield is a human, and he helped me fix my problem. He talked me through it. He's more technically sound than I am. I'm just a talking head, I guess. John C. says, hey, Tony, thanks for joining me, John. And Clarence Washington says, and maybe rightfully so, we cannot have Marsh coming in as a backup on the outside. Yeah, that's. I mean, he really hasn't produced a whole lot. He's your classic journeyman. So that could be a bit of a problem. Hopefully, Roche can surprise a lot of people as a 6th round pick. But again, you have to wonder why people like Houston and Ingram are still out there, and not just when it comes to the Steelers, but a lot of these teams that have a healthy amount, or at least it would appear. I'm no expert on salary caps, but it would appear that a lot of teams have a healthy amount of space. So why are these players still sitting out there? It's just a question that might not be answered. Maybe not until at some point in training camp. Maybe an injury will force somebody to sign one of these guys. It remains to be seen. All right. Oh, here's one from George Teston. Yep, last night my comp decided to do an update. I hated that. Isn't Windows always doing updates? I mean, how many updates can you do? I have that issue all the time. It's like every other week I get a notice for an update on my laptop and on my phone. I just updated my Android the other day, and it's already telling me to update it again. It's just so weird. Get out of here with that stuff. I'm not doing that. It takes forever. And on that note, as I complained enough tonight, I will bid you adieu. I appreciate you staying with me and coming. You guys are so awesome. The way you keep coming back, and here we are as I'm doing this show. It's July 16th, and there's not a whole lot of news, and you guys are still coming back and taking in the show, and I appreciate that. So on that note, I'll talk to you on Monday. It'll be Shannon and yours truly doing the hangover. Brian will be on a little vacation, so we'll be doing the show. I'm looking forward to that. So I'll see you then. And until I do, please have a great weekend. And as always, go Steelers. Good night, everybody.